I'm here to talk about the elephant in the room. The way we're working isn't really working. Not for you, not for me, maybe not for anyone. We're spending most of our waking hours inside systems that weren't built for equity or democracy or even sustainability. We see it happening in business, in government, in culture, in our calendars. We know the old way of working isn't working. So the question is, what comes next? Well, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's what this podcast is here to do. To eat this elephant one bite or episode at a time. Hi, I'm Brittany Martin, and this is COO-fessions, rethinking leadership, power, and alignment in the age of collapse. This is a limited run podcast series where in each episode, we explore a key leadership trend shaping the future of business, a future where profit isn't the only bottom line, where leadership isn't about control, but about alignment, where operations, systems, and strategy actually serve people, and where the way we work finally works. Before we dive in, I want to ground us in these words from Dean Spade's book, Mutual Aid. Things are really terrifying and enraging right now, and feeling more rage, fear, sadness, grief, and despair may be appropriate. Those feelings may help us be less appeased by false solutions and stir us to pursue ongoing collective action for change. What we build now and whether we can sustain it will determine how prepared we are for the next pandemic, the climate-induced disasters to come, the ongoing disasters of white supremacy and capitalism, and the beautifully disruptive rebellions that will transform them. This podcast is about earned hope, not the kind you manifest, the kind you build, one uncomfortable question at a time. Looking at the systems we've inherited and daring to imagine something different. Because business as usual is crumbling, and that means we have a choice. Do we burn it all down, or do we build something better? Let's figure it out together. Before we get into anything else, I want to name something. Because the idea of talking about leadership or business at this particular moment can feel disorienting and maybe out of touch. We are 18 months into watching a genocide unfolding live on our phones. Not a chapter in a history book, but in real time. With every scroll, every push notification, every pixel. It's impossible to unsee and unbearable to keep watching. And yet we do, because we're human, because we care, because we're trying to survive the day and still bear witness to the world falling apart. An incomprehensible cruelty. But this moment didn't come out of nowhere. We're 5 years out from the Black Lives Matter uprisings, when police violence became impossible to ignore because we saw it, not filtered through press conferences or headlines, but through cell phone footage, through live streams, through grief that went viral. It broke open what so many had been trying to hold together. And it wasn't just about outrage. It was about visibility, about accountability, about not being able to say, I didn't know anymore. We're also 5 years out from a global pandemic that stripped away the illusion of business as usual and made it undeniable that leadership is life or death. For a moment, the entire world stopped. Borders closed. Cities emptied. Hospitals overflowed, and we were forced to reckon with systems that could not and would not hold all of us. We saw who got protected and who got sacrificed. We watched governments rise and crumble under the weight of responsibility. We witnessed it in real time, the relationship between power and care, between public messaging and public trust, between individual choices and collective survival. And through it all, we were connected by fear, by hope, by timelines full of sourdough starters and death tolls, and by a growing awareness that what happens at scale always starts in structure. We're 8 years past the Women's March, which showed us that pink hats and empowerment slogans wouldn't save us, that feminism without intersectionality was just another version of erasure. And we're nearly 2 decades past electing the first Black president, a moment sold as progress, but one that left the systems beneath it fully intact. So if you have found yourself asking, why are we even talking about leadership right now? Why does any of this matter when the world is on fire? You're not wrong to ask. In fact, those might be the exact right questions, because what's happening out there, it's not separate from what's happening in here, in our politics, in our parenting, in our inboxes, and definitely not in our businesses, because now we all have access to footage, to context, to the full picture. And that access brings responsibility, not to be perfect, not to have the hottest take, not to be constantly online, but to not look away, to stop saying that's not my lane or that's not my work, to recognize that choosing silence is also a form of participation. This is the reality of leadership in the digital age. We are leading in public. We are leading while watching. We are leading while knowing. And knowing makes us accountable to our teams, to our values, to the systems that we operate inside. So no, this podcast isn't just about operations or org charts or quarterly planning cycles. It's about what we're doing here, why it feels so heavy, and what we could build instead. Because if you've been trying to lead while holding grief, holding tension, holding it all together, you are not alone. And this moment, it's asking something different of us. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the truth behind the scenes, the quiet misalignments, the stories we stopped telling ourselves because they didn't fit the narrative. Let's talk about the systems we're replicating and the ones we're ready to reimagine. We are not separate from this. We are living inside smaller versions of the same machine, a machine that thrives on obedience, on overwork, on silence, on extraction. We are told, work harder, hustle more, keep climbing, be grateful. But for what? For a system that keeps us just safe enough not to revolt, just exhausted enough not to resist, just distracted enough not to ask better questions? This isn't about productivity. It's about complicity. And if we don't interrupt it, if we don't build something different, we are always at risk of becoming both the tools and the targets of the very systems we thought we could outwork. So yes, care. Care because it's right. Care because your freedom is tied up in everyone else's. And care because what we build next, it better not look like this. Let me back up. You might be wondering who I am and why I'm the one in your ear. Before I tell you about my work, I want to tell you about where I'm coming from. I'm a cisgender white woman. I move through the world with a lot of safety and a lot of unearned benefit inside the very systems I'm critiquing. I've had access to education, to leadership roles, to the kind of privilege that shows up in being able-bodied, English-speaking, US-born, and yes, even in how I look, how I sound, and how I'm perceived. I've benefited from capitalism, from whiteness, from proximity to power. And I have also felt the cost on my body, in my leadership, and in the tension between my values and the roles I've played. This isn't me trying to distance myself from the problem. It's me naming that I've been shaped by it too. And I'm still unlearning. I'm not the first person to say any of this. I'm building on work shaped by people like Dean Spade, Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, and so many others who've been naming this dissonance for decades. But I am saying business can't sit this part out. And the more honest I've become about that, what I've seen, what I've contributed to, and what I want to help build, the more real my work has become. I spent the last several years in a leadership role that was very good, the kind of role people respect, the kind of role people don't leave. And yet I left, not because I was burnt out, not because I hated the work. In fact, I liked the work, but because I was hiding inside that work. I was doing good work with great people inside a structure that felt increasingly safe, but in a world that was becoming more unsafe by the day. I couldn't keep playing small. I knew that if I wanted to do work that truly aligned with my values, that reflected the world I want to help build, I had to stop performing safety and start telling the truth, the whole truth. And here's the truth, or at least part of it. You can do meaningful work. You can hit every KPI. You can lead with empathy, scale with grace, run a clean ship, and still find yourself feeding a system that doesn't serve you, that doesn't serve anyone. We've mistaken performance for leadership, productivity for progress, control for clarity. And if we don't disrupt that cycle, we will spend our entire careers optimizing a machine that was never meant for us to survive. And let's talk about collapse for a minute, because when I say we're here to rethink leadership, power, and alignment in the age of collapse, I am aware that the age of collapse might sound a little dramatic. It's not just rhetoric, and it's not hyperbole. Although I do love a little hyperbole, you're always welcome to check me on it, please. But collapse doesn't always look like flames and riots, although there are a lot of flames and riots right now. Sometimes it looks like record profits while your team quietly burns out. Sometimes it looks like board meetings that pretend nothing is wrong, nothing to see here. Sometimes it looks like business as usual, when nothing about this moment is usual. We're watching institutions unravel in real time. Governments, corporations, higher education, the environment, our ability to focus, our capacity to trust. And this isn't just a glitch. It's not a bug in the system. It is the system. Capitalism didn't just happen. It was built, and it started with enclosure. In 16th century England, the ruling class began fencing off what had once been shared land, the commons, land that communities lived on, farmed, and stewarded together. That land was claimed, privatized, and those who relied on it were forced into the cities, into wage labor, into dependency. That's how capitalism was born, not through innovation or competition, but through displacement and enclosure and the concentration of power. And now we're watching the same story play out again, only this time it's not farmland being enclosed. It's your attention, your data, your creativity, your ability to gather, share, build. It's all been privatized, just like healthcare was privatized. And now public education is next, under attack by billionaires who want to control not just what we consume, but what we learn. We've got public transit systems collapsing while rideshare companies rewrite labor law. Public discourse held hostage by billionaires with Twitter logins and God complexes. Infrastructure, communication, even freedom of movement, all increasingly dependent on platforms we don't control, designed by people who don't answer to us. As economist Yanis Varoufakis argues, we may no longer be living under capitalism as it was originally designed. We've entered into the age of technofeudalism, where the platforms are the new land, the tech lords are the new monarchs, and the rest of us, we are the peasants, producing value on land we'll never own, paying rent in attention, creativity, and labor, and calling it freedom. In capitalism, at least in theory, you owned your labor. You could sell it, negotiate it, bargain for better. In techno-feudalism, you don't own anything, not the platforms you build your business on, not the audience you cultivate, not the data you collect, not the content you create, not even your own timelines. You are producing value inside someone else's infrastructure. And if one algorithm changes, if one tech overlord pulls the plug, you disappear. We are peasants, working land we don't own, paying rent in attention, in creativity, in metadata, generating wealth for platforms that will never share it. And the devices we use to participate in this system, they run on cobalt and coltan, extracted through violence and child labor in the Congo and Sudan. This isn't just about content strategy, it's about supply chains of suffering. So when I say we are peasants, I don't mean that metaphorically, and I'm not being cute. We are laboring in someone else's empire, and we're calling it entrepreneurship. We keep building businesses like it's 1997. We keep trying to run ethical companies on top of systems that were designed for exploitation. We keep recycling frameworks and 5-year plans and calling it progress. And even as I say all of this, I'm sitting here in comfort at my computer using technology produced through systems of violence and child labor. That's the dissonance. That is the misalignment. And that's why COO-fessions exists. Because it's not enough to name what's broken. We have to ask, is it even possible to build a different future when we're already so far down this path? That's the question. And I don't have an easy answer, but I do believe it's worth asking together. This series isn't about fixing your business plan. It's about asking better questions. It's about telling the truth about leadership from the inside out. Because if we are going to hold power, if we're going to build companies, design systems, shape culture, then we can't keep pretending leadership is neutral. It never has been. Business is activism, or at least it can be. Not because you posted a black square once, not because you gave your team a wellness stipend, but because every business is a structure. And every structure shapes people, how you lead, how you pay, how you make decisions, how you set expectations. All of it is culture making. All of it is political. That's why we need to talk about prefigurative leadership. Prefigurative leadership means leading now in the ways we hope the future will look. It means modeling the values, structures, and relationships we say we want to build right now, even inside imperfect systems. It's leadership as a form of practice, not just performance. It says, if we want more equity in the world, we have to build equity into our org charts. If we want regenerative economies, we have to stop burning people out in the name of growth. If we want liberation, we can't keep designing roles that rely on silent suffering and overfunctioning. Prefigurative leadership means not waiting for the world to change, but building small versions of that world in the way we lead right now. Because the way you write job descriptions, the way you run meetings, the way you hold power, handle rupture, that's the future. Or at least it's your rehearsal for it. And if the emotional case doesn't move you, let's look at the numbers. According to Gallup, businesses with highly engaged teams see 23% higher profitability and 18% higher productivity. A global study from the ADP Research Institute found that employees who trust their team leader are 12 times more likely to be fully engaged at work. 12 times. In 2023, the American Psychological Association reported that 57% of U.S. workers say that work-related stress negatively impacts their lives, emotionally, mentally, and physically, with burnout showing up as exhaustion, irritability, and detachment. The World Health Organization estimates that depression and anxiety, much of it driven by workplace stress, costs the global economy $1 trillion a year in lost productivity. Your systems are working exactly as they were designed to. And while it's not your job to fix every broken system, You are accountable for the results of the ones you are running. If those systems are producing resentment, overwork, quiet quitting, or turnover, that's not a fluke. That's the function. The good news? You can redesign any system you're responsible for, any process, policy, or power dynamic that shapes your daily reality, but only if you're willing to tell the truth first. We don't just need better strategies. We need better stories about power, about productivity, about what leadership can be, because the stories we tell ourselves about leadership, they become the structures we live inside. In this series, I'm talking to leaders, COOs, CEOs, strategists, and operators who are already asking these questions. Questions like, is the CEO-COO dynamic actually working, or is it just a corporate hierarchy with a rebrand? What happens when we stop treating operations as spreadsheets and start seeing it as an art form? What does alignment actually look like when your body says no, but your calendar says yes? And how do we build leadership cultures that don't just look good, but feel good? You'll hear from Sarah Paikai on the creativity of operations, Barrett Brooks on the CEO-COO model, when it works and when it's a mess, Amina Altai on leadership, chronic illness, and the cost of hustle, Tamu Thomas on redefining productivity and reclaiming your pace, Bob Gower on radical alignment in teams, Ray McDaniel on identity and leading from the middle of becoming, and Trudy LeBron on building prefigurative business models that actually reflect the future we want. This is not about being the perfect leader. It's about being an aware one, because the way we run our businesses, it echoes, it ripples, it builds the world we live in. And we don't just need better leaders. We need leaders who co-create better structures. So if you've ever wondered, why doesn't this feel right? Why am I so tired? Why does building something better feel so hard? You're in the right place. The full series is coming soon as a private podcast. You'll be able to binge it all at once, reflect with the workbooks, or book a one-on-one strategy session with me to go deeper. You can get access at COO-fessions.com. That's COO-fessions, like confessions without the con. If this stirred something in you, don't sit on it, share it, speak on it, invite someone else into the conversation, because this work doesn't get lighter with silence. It gets lighter when we carry it together. COO-fessions is built around big questions and deep conversations, and the best conversations happen when more people are part of them. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for building something different. And remember, what we build next, it better not look like this. And that's not a threat, it's a promise.
You lived a lie all this time.